and special ed.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. There you go.
So-
Well,
Yeah. So, so what do you think about that question?
Yeah.
What do you think happens after we die?
I think that, right, the laws of physics say that energy is
Can't be created
can't
or
be
destroyed.
created or destroyed. And given that there is an energy in our life, right, and in our bodies, and that keeps us living, I do think that that energy transforms in death, and I do believe in some sort of afterlife or energetic shift of our souls and the energy that keeps us alive and keeps our bodies going, and that there's some sort of transformation. I'm a big fan of the idea of the white light and, some sort of experience after death. And not sure what that is, but I believe in the possibility of it.
Is that something you have come to believe or were taught by your parents, or
I would say that that's my, probably a combination of my own evolution and consciousness, and is raised Catholic, and there's heavy belief in the afterlife and angels and all that, and I do believe that our relatives who pass try to give us signs if you're open to seeing them, or that your awareness, your consciousness and your awareness is open to the invitation that, you will have those signs from time to time of your angels or your spirit guides or whatever that may be.
Yeah.
I've come to believe that I've had some of those experiences, and that my family is generally, I think, very open to the idea that our loved ones visit us after death or give us signs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you think about this, like turning into energy, you're thinking that we would still keep our memories and our, consciousness and ability to talk and speak to, like, we would be us, I guess. We would have
I don't
consciousness.
necessarily know. I have a lot of ideas that, think about our pets and animals and things like that. I don't know how that energy transforms. I don't necessarily think that the people that we love after they die are the same, beings, so to speak. But, I don't have any strongly formed opinions. I like the mystery of it.
Yeah. May I ask, like, what you've seen, like what you've experienced? And I'll say this, of the people I talk to, I think, and, I've done this for a while, so I kind of see percentages, or, so I would say about maybe 15 to 20% have actually, like, told me they experienced something like this. So you're in the minority, but not, it's fairly common,
Yeah. It's been a long time, so I don't, nothing like super fresh in my mind, but I will say that while I was pregnant, I definitely felt like I was more in tune or more spiritually available in a way that I hadn't been previously. And my daughter's grandfather on her dad's side had passed not long before my pregnancy. And while I was pregnant and at her, living at her dad's house, would come home and I'd be by myself at night and I'd be watching the news in English, and then at 10 o'clock when Friends would come on, it would switch to Spanish, but I wasn't changing the channel or putting, SAP on or doing anything different. And it would happen every night, and then the TV would be fine after that. So her paternal grandfather, he was like a native Spanish speaker.
Okay.
And later on, I found out that Friends was his favorite program. And then also after I had my daughter, the same thing would happen again while I was like watching TV, that Spanish language like news would come on or something would change and I wasn't doing anything. And it even continued after I moved out of his house, this was his dad, but I think it was just...
Did he live there too, or?
No.
Oh.
No, I think he was just letting me know that like he was aware of my daughter, his granddaughter,
Saying she
like
raised her speaking Spanish.
Yeah, and so I had already intended to raise her speaking Spanish, but she goes to a Spanish-speaking school now. So.
Oh.
But it was just a reminder, and because of the recent passing, right? It was particularly, I felt like, acute or important for him to let it be known that he knew of his granddaughter's, impending arrival.
So the TV, I'm just curious. If it was the old-fashioned kind of TV where you have to like turn the channel and it's like this mechanical, physical act, it'd be really weird to see it actually changing, right?
Yeah.
Now, what did it take to switch the channel, or what would it take to switch the channel to? Is that a different channel, or is it?
So when we were watching Friends, no.
But there's a way to make it into Spanish?
I suppose, but I wasn't doing anything. Like literally sitting in the same spot.
And then
in a chair, like not moving. Like.
And then would you switch it back somehow? Or?
I would be like, there were times where I was like, what's going on? How do I try to get it to go back? And I couldn't. Like, just couldn't. Just wouldn't happen.
It's a little creepy, maybe, or maybe not. No, not creepy. It'd be creepy if the actual channel changed.
No,
like
the channel didn't change. But it was it's WGN. WGN doesn't have Spanish language programming.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
And so that's
unusual. So most of the time when people say this, it's like they see a vision of the person standing there or whatever. And most of the time it's close to they had passed and it's within weeks or months of that, Yeah. And so for you it was, right?
Yeah. And again, it wasn't my relative, so I found it interesting that, I definitely remember having little things like, bells ringing or little, I have another great story about, this is actually, I can't believe I forgot this one. So my daughter had her first birthday party, and her dad and I planned this party, but we're not a couple. So, he did his thing, I did my thing. But this balloon guy comes into the party. He's there to like make balloons and stuff, and he's phenomenal, like out of this world. Just everyone at the party ends up talking about this guy, and when he walks into the party, he's like, well, where do you want me to set up? And I was like, I don't know, what are you here to do? I just figured her dad hired this guy. And because we had like a circus guy on stilts and other, so there was other things going on, and I was like, I don't know, what do you do? He's like, well, I make balloons. I could stand in the center of the room and walk around. I was like, I don't know, talk to her dad. And he's like, oh, I don't know, whatever. Thought that I ordered the guy. And so this guy ends up being like the head of the party. He's like super talented, and we're off in this weird nightclub in the industrial area, like west of the West Loops. This party's not like easy to find or anything like that either. And And so at the end of the party, maybe it was like the next day or two, her dad's like, yeah, I didn't hire that guy. I was like, I didn't hire that guy. Who sent this guy? Or where did he come from? And he found out later that he was at the wrong party. He was supposed to be at a party like in the condo building like a block away or something.
Okay.
And considering that I believe in the power of the afterlife, and I went to somebody who's more of an, I guess you would say, an intuitive.
Yeah.
I didn't say like a psychic or anything. She's like, oh, that was your grandma's birthday gift to your daughter.
Okay.
It's just that it was so random, and like, I mean, just like how the stars would have had to align to like have like some serendipitous mistake like that happen.
Right.
And it seemed like it was so intentional, like meant to be, and that like made the party so special, you know?
Yeah.
Like, those are the things that are head scratchers, even if you're not a believer.
Right.
Like, it's too good to be true. It's too perfect. Like, it was just, you know, made everything work.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah,
So-
I like that. I like to believe that's true.
Yeah. So you definitely believe there's like a spiritual level to existence, it sounds like.
Yeah.
There's a part of us that is not part of our body. In other words, our body dies, but there's a part of us that lives on.
Yeah.
But you're not sure, is it conscious or not? Would you say you believe in God or a higher power of some sort?
I think in the same realm, I believe that there is a multi-layered higher existence in our universe. And, you know, if we want to think of it as a singular being like God, or kind of an energetic, you know, being or energy that exists among multitudes of you know, spiritual beings. But yeah, I do in general believe in a higher power.
I guess the way I try to put it is, do you believe in a creator as opposed to the creation? So, and that would be not necessarily the Christian God or, you know, of a certain religion, but just a creator that had always existed and brought everything into existence, you know?
I tend to frame my belief in spiritual power, higher power, in light of a more scientific frame of mind. So, you know, if I had to say, do I believe in a creator, you know, the Big Bang Theory, I'd probably say the Big Bang Theory. But again, I do think that there's laws of physics and laws of nature that occur, and that our universe is so multi-layered and infinite that, you know, there's no way for us as humans to kind of unravel or understand.
Right.
And you know, and I say that leaning more towards kind of scientific belief, because maybe that helps me understand it better. You know, and having that framework of science and physics and nature and you know, that maybe helps me frame it. So, you know, but I would say I tend to believe more in that than a creator, so to speak.
And I think a creator implies that so science is like, they also call it naturalism. So in other words, nothing can exist outside of established laws of science, right? Like the law of gravity or electromagnetic theory or whatever, you know?
Right.
And the thing is, we don't know, like, is gravity valid elsewhere? Like, are there places where this law of gravity, for example, isn't the law?
Right.
See what I'm saying? We don't know that.
We don't know that.
Yeah. And so, you know, I have heard scientists say, well, that's why we have science, so we can keep learning these things, and, you know.
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to determine if something is true everywhere in the universe, you know?
Right. Well, because we can't, I mean, I feel that we can't know the universe, and again, our the way that science operates, right, to have a hypothesis and test a hypothesis, and I strongly believe in the scientific method, but I also think that there's just so much, right, about science and about understanding our Earth and our universe as like not meant for us to be known, or that we can't even, as humans,
I can't wrap my head around how big this universe is and how small.
There's beauty in that mystery, and so that's why I say I'm maybe more of a scientist with a spiritual slant, than I am a believer in creationism and the kind of things that I was raised with in terms of religion and things like that. I'm not a big fan of the singular God and Jesus and the prophets and creationism kind of theory.
Was there a certain point where you, growing up, made a kind of a conscious decision to go away from your Catholic background, or go towards, I guess,
think
science?
It didn't. I think a lot of it, in terms of that specific question, I think that the world that was, or the worldview that was sometimes discussed at church, and depending on where you went to church and who gave mass, was completely different than just what I believe to be true in terms of...
Or what you were learning in school, or...
Right, yeah, I went to, public school, too. I didn't go to Catholic school, so, it just felt that, and I think also in terms of just growing up and feeling in my family a general sense of that, we're all sinners, but we shouldn't shun or have maybe taking such harsh viewpoints that might be in line with the faith, not
avoid extremes,
right?
Extreme
It's not it was you're it was a disconnect for me in terms of loving one another and having empathy and having respect for each other, and then going to church and you're gonna go to eternal damnation if you believe in this or that, the other thing. And again, I think that it's really dependent on the type of parish or the type of priest you encountered, because here I was going to this very what you could probably consider somewhat liberal, open, family-oriented parish, but then going to church with your grandparents where there's talk about the fires of hell. Yeah.
I'm not Catholic, by the way. I go to a Protestant church, so.
Yeah, but it's all
kind
about.
Of depends on the leaders of the particular.
Yeah, and I think you see the same issues today about I think it's hard for any religion or any Christians particularly, I'll say, because it's that's what I'm most familiar with, to not have your beliefs somewhat politicized, and at the end of the day, really, I think religion should make you feel good about yourself and about thinking about how to be better humans to one another, right? And that's what's the most important value. And I can do that outside of church too. I can find ways to expand that and practice that and exercise my skills like outside of the church. And you know, meanwhile, I'm a total hypocrite because I send my kid to a Catholic school. So just be fair.
Okay. So you were saying also that like you didn't like the idea of God or Jesus or, you know, like certain things. Is there something in particular about maybe the story or the narrative or the message of Christianity that
I mean,
you find troubling?
I don't know when I maybe has struggled with that story, but I think in terms of, you know, I feel like I wanted to connect to it and tried to be participatory and like church, but then, you know, when I look back on it, I was like, yeah, it's mostly involved with church stuff for like the social aspects of it, or
it's part of the culture.
Like, it felt good and I liked doing certain things, but I didn't like going to church. But I liked participating in choir. I liked doing like teen retreat, or, you know, so I don't know that it was tied to like feeling closer to God and really. And, you know, certainly I think as I got older, you know, it's very patriarchal. It's very, you know, I think that as a woman, it's quite liberal woman. It's a hard pill to swallow in terms of how church and Christianity and this supreme being and, you know, male oriented and male pronouns and those things is sold and packaged. And, you know, particularly as a Catholic and the crisis that the church is in right now in terms of, you know, all the many issues, but, you know, you know, just standing out still is the fact that, you know, women can't serve, and it's such a silly thing, and that, you know, priests can't be married or have families. You know, this is what makes people human and makes people better humans. And, you know, it's kind of funny to be like, you know, in the indoctrination of Catholicism, like, seek counsel from your pastor. What does your pastor know about relationships or family or child rearing, or, you know, like all these things that they're not supposed to be doing. So, you know, again, it's just there's some fundamental beliefs and you know, that don't sit well with me in terms of how the church is structured, and then as a woman, it's like doesn't feel comforting or doesn't feel like necessarily like a safe space, and particularly with all the other issues. And so I speak to, you know. And
I do want to say this, that I've talked with a lot of different people. There's a lot of atheists also that are very, very critical of the Bible and church, and have come from a background like yourself. And I feel like I've heard everything. I'm sure I haven't heard everything, but so I'm not, you know, like, so I'm a Christian, but I'm not offended that you feel this way. I want you to know that. So, like, don't feel like...
if I thought you were offended or not open to having discussion.
And I've learned it's been a very enlightening process for me to hear people's viewpoints and open up these kind of conversations and that sort of thing. So,
and
I appreciate it.
I will say that, you know, atheists are like hard pill for me to swallow too, because that they, you know, atheism is really saying I don't believe in anything further than an existence past this natural life that I have, and for me that's hard to reconcile.
It's kind of an arrogant approach to take. It's almost like saying, in all of the universe I know God doesn't exist. You know, it's like, okay, have you been there? Like, see what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's definitely a part of me that feels like, but, you know, an agnostic approach is like the safe like fallback.
I think it is. I would be an agnostic if I hadn't, you know, had the personal experiences with Christ that I've had,
Mm-hmm.
then I would think, yeah, to be just agnostic just means I claim ignorance. I don't know.
I don't know,
and I
and
think
I'm
that's
not-
a very humble and wise approach to take. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And I do feel like there's some agnostics who are like, I don't know and I don't want to know. And then there's some who are like, I don't know and I'd like to know, you know? And so there's different
levels of
different
what
ways
people's,
of
belief
I don't know and I don't
system.
care, you know, that's
Yeah.
kind of cold, you know? I don't know and I do care and I would like to know. To me that makes more sense.
Yeah, I mean, I agree in terms of being or feeling and having spiritual experiences that I've had and feeling a deep connection to like some sort of unknown that's outside of my control and outside of my natural life. Like it is hard to reconcile that with friends and people who are atheists and that is because I believe it so deeply.
Yeah.
So just like any other deeply held belief, that is hard, even though I'm not a religious person, to be like, well, nothing at all exists at all? Come on. Like, and being open to those experiences or being able to invite that mystery in to say, yeah, maybe it's silly that I think my grandma visited our birthday party for my daughter. Maybe it's silly to think that, but I would rather like revel in the mystery of it.
Yeah.
And
I hear a lot of Catholicism coming through because just the idea that I'm comfortable with the mystery. I mean, there's a lot of mystery in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
I think there used to be even more when the masses were in Latin, or so I think people learn to embrace or accept the mystery. As a Protestant, our tradition is, well, let's read the Bible for ourselves. We don't have to live in
there's
the
a mystery of why.
Like there's
that's a lot of believe in this, although it's a mystery. You should believe in this.
Yeah.
I agree.
like we kind of like know the biblical reasoning behind things, and in the Catholic Church, to me, it seems like there's a lot of symbolism, like the Lord's Supper, I guess what's called the Eucharist.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like, the way I think about it is, we know food is good for us, right? And if you just accept the mystery, it's just like, hey, it tastes good, it smells good, just eat it, you'll feel energized by it. It's a mystery, I don't know how it works, right?
Yeah.
And as a Protestant, I would say, well, but we also have available to us all the nutritional information, like how does it work, and why is it good for us, and what does it do, and which foods are better, and why not learn that,
Right.
Does it take away from the mystery of it, or the enjoyment of it? I guess I actually enjoy some foods because I know they're good for me, even though they don't taste as good as the ones that I know
you
are
have
not.
the knowledge and
it's like, wow, this not only tastes good, but it's good for me. Wow, this is great, So now I eat my vegetables.
Well, I think you speak to another aspect of religion, right? And although it's, I don't want to say the wrong word would be offensive, but like unappealing to me to practice faith in a church, but maybe that's also by virtue of, I haven't found the church with the right menu, keeping with our food theme, of like how palatable or how it speaks to me, right? And or
like, would you
fits
say
in with
you're
my values.
Are you a person who really likes the mystery, or you've said that, but the symbolism and the art and the seeing the stained glass and the pictures of the Stations of the Cross and the different
there's
the
beauty
different symbols.
in that. There's beauty in all of that, but I think at the end of the day, I appreciate people who have deep faith and especially in these times, I'll preface that with the fact that deep faith, that's not necessarily politicized or make them take positions that cut them off from like having communication or having relationships because of their faith. And I enjoy knowing and seeing people who I know who have deep faith and like how they put that into action, and it may not be something that maybe appeals to me directly, but like to see the joy that they find and exercising their faith and practicing their faith, and a faith that truly feels inclusive and loving and empathetic, and knowing that again, that in general people of faith are really trying to do their best job as people, and to be their best people, and and I think I appreciate the beauty in their faith and how they practice it and respect that. Although I may not be a true believer, so to speak, in any faith particularly, I certainly find, almost wish that I had that that ability to be as faithful or believe in God as that deeply. Like there's beauty in that, and whatever way and whatever form it happens, and it's really the beauty of faith is again bringing people together, and for those who practice faith such as that are inclusive in nature, I'm like all for it. It's when we start politicizing and damning certain behaviors or certain
very
mindsets,
easily categorizing people.
Right.
Yeah.
But, or telling if you believe this, then you're not a believer. Like the indoctrinating people for having their own minds and their own beliefs. I mean,
I think that's kind of been a challenge for me, is to try to figure out what are primary issues of Christianity and what are the secondary ones. So like as I've met different people, some things we're free to disagree about. So as I read the Bible, and as I get that perspective, it's like, okay, well, what are some different things that the Bible is kind of vague on,
right,
and not real clear on, and I think good people of good faith from both sides can disagree on, and then there's some things that would be, this is Christianity, this is what it means to be a Christian, and the Bible itself would state that if you don't believe these things, or if you don't if you don't, I guess it's more like certain beliefs, these are the primary things. So let me ask you this, the Eucharist, right? So I was talking about, like, it's food. I mean, it really is food, right? And so,
blood of Christ.
So what is your understanding growing up? Like, what was that all about? What does it mean?
I don't know. I don't know what I thought at that time. I mean, I don't. And
It's like, it gives you this good feeling, maybe.
Yeah, because you're like, I just remember feeling like, oh yeah, I'm an adult in the eyes of the church, or I'm
right,
I'm holy enough. I'm like, I've done my training. I can eat the wafers now.
Right.
Yeah, I don't remember having any particular strong feeling about it when I was younger. I see Catholicism, or at least Catholicism, or my experience as a religion, almost like as a family, like tradition that you do, like not, like it was attached to, our cultural identity, as being like Polish, and you
right,
like go to church and you celebrate your holidays in the Catholic tradition, and that's kind of blended and merged into, you know, like my adulthood, even though I'm not a practicing Catholic.
Right.
I would say that, you know, taking the Eucharist, I took the Eucharist like last week at my aunt's funeral, and that was probably the first time in 10 years. I don't even know when the last time it was.
Sorry to hear about your aunt.
No, thank you. You know, and I was like debating in church. I'm like, I really shouldn't do this because I haven't had reconciliation and I don't practice the faith. But I was like, no, you know, now's not the time to
I don't
like.
want to stand out.
Yeah. Now's like not the time to make a personal statement.
Right.
Like, my aunt would probably be like, go ahead.
Yeah.
You know, like,
when it comes down to it, what would your aunt have wanted?
She probably would have been like, yeah, go ahead, take that.
Yeah.
She's a woman of great faith, you know.
So I grew up Lutheran, which is kind of like
It's like the closest
Catholic light, you know.
Yeah.
And for me, my experience was, so I was confirmed in the Lutheran church and everything, probably about the same age, you know, like.
Yeah, you have your
confirmation.
confirmation in 8th grade.
But receiving communion or the Eucharist, that's
like younger. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, so it would be like about 8th grade, and maybe 9th grade. And so I had some people come to reach out to me and my friends at the high school. They were Christians, they weren't Lutheran, but basically just kind of sticking with the basic message of Christianity, which is all about Jesus, right? And when I first heard that, I remember thinking, well, Jesus is another one of those people in the Bible. I know about Noah and Moses and Daniel and Paul and Peter, you know, all these different people that I had learned about. And I'm not blaming my Lutheran church at all, but somehow I missed out that Jesus was like it, you know, like all the prophets of the Old Testament were predicting this coming Messiah, and then Jesus comes and has this ministry and culminates in his crucifixion and resurrection. And then you've got his disciples going out and starting churches and writing letters about, you know, about that, what it means to be a Christian and how to run the churches and things. And then you've got this prediction of Jesus coming again.
Right, second coming.
So Jesus is really like the center figure of the Bible, you know, whether he's coming in the future or he's here now or we're reacting to his coming.
Right.
And having a relationship with, you know, because he rose again, we can have a relationship with this living person, a faith relationship, you know, not like, but I never got that from church, you know, and
this is the funniest thing.
And I don't blame the church. I think somehow I missed it, you know, like, what was I dense or, you know, I don't know.
It's true. I mean, I remember like in junior high when we were doing like religious ed, and you know, you're going once a week for an hour and a half, and you know, you're doing this in preparation for your confirmation. But I remember, you know, we're like all hung up as preteens on like the rapture and the second coming of Jesus and how the, you know, on earth, like Jesus is gonna make his return, and you know, who we have to be careful because it might not be Jesus, it might be the devil, like,
right.
You know, like. And
I'm surprised they emphasized
very,
that.
very like, I think we were, as junior high, like,
you just
age,
picked up on
we
it.
were like, oh yeah, conspiracy theory. Like,
Yeah.
we were way into it, you know?
Yeah.
It's very, how you say, almost like comic book, right? Very, like, Marvel type of,
Yeah.
you know?
Like a superhero.
Yeah, superhero type of thing. And you know, even now, though, when you were speaking and talking about like the second coming of Christ, the funniest thing is as Easter approaches, right? And my daughter, who's young and, you know, in Catholic school, and like trying to talking about how Jesus died, but he's going to come back, and like how kids like are processing this information. And so whenever Easter comes around, it's like, there's always some interesting conversations that happen, right? Because this concept that they're trying to, as small children, like understand how, you know, Jesus is gonna like push the stone off of his tomb and rise again, right? And and those make for very interesting conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, my feeling too is, although I'm not, you know, a person of, you know, Christian faith, right, to allow my daughter to have the opportunity to be educated
Mm-hmm.
and learn about religion, to me is important. And you know, maybe it doesn't have to be Catholicism, it could be something else, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm not interested in really seeking anything else out.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
hey, you know, go
At
ahead,
least you'll have a
learn
connection
about
with her
it. Yeah,
other
if you-
family members too, you know.
Right, to understand exactly. You know, this is something that's, you know, prolific within the family, and you
Right.
understand going to church. And when you're older, you can decide
Yeah.
what makes sense for you.
Yeah.
And you know, I'll give you the freedom to make that. But I don't want you to grow up with like. I always, you know, as kids, you were always suspect of the people who like didn't go to church at all.
Right.
Like you have to have a religion.
Right.
It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, I grew up with like a lot of Muslims too, but everybody had a religion. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
You had to practice something. It's always the kids that had no religion at all. You're like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with your parents?
Right.
So.
I think, I mean, I meet a lot of, like I say, atheists who say I would not raise my child in any kind of religion or whatever, and or actually very prevalent is people saying, well, I just want to let them decide for themselves, right? But if they're not raised in a religion, then they're not learning. Like, how can you make a decision
You
if
can't have. There has to be some level of exposure.
Yeah.
I agree, and I think that, like anything else, I mean, how are you going to say, well, I'm going to let my kid, you know, decide when they feel like it if they want to be like a basketball player? No,
Right.
you like let your kid play basketball,
Yes,
right? And
yeah.
then when they're older, they either decide to stick with it or
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
You can't just be like, oh, well, now they're 18, they can decide whether or not they want
Right.
to be a basketball star. Like,
Right.
you know, I think it's the same concept.
no,
It's-
I think I'll play hockey. Well, you've never heard of
right.
hockey before, or played
Right,
it.
played it or had
Yeah.
exposure, and you know, how do you know if you're gonna like it or not if you never were allowed to experience it, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's the same thing. I think that, you know, exposure is important, even if you're not you're an atheist, you're a non-believer, you know, and even if it's, you know, something as benign as, you know people who are part of, you know, I wouldn't say religion, but more, you know, pan-Christian fellowship type of communities, or, you know, you know, or
Get to know people from
Universalist Unitarians,
Right.
or you know,
Yeah.
things where people are able to come together to share a common bond, like even if it's as, you know, benign as that, and you know, and I actually see a lot of people that I grew up with in the Catholic Church who kind of enjoy participating in those more pan-Christian atmospheres, right? And you know, not having the same sort of dogma attached with maybe the, you know, the church setting, and having it be a little bit more lighter and pleasant and connecting to a different type of message that is connected to Jesus, but, you know, not in such a rigid or, you know, 1,000-year-old institution, institutionalized church. And
So, do you feel like you understand the basic message of Christianity, as far as like if you're going away from it or have rejected it, do you understand what you've rejected? Because a lot of people, I find, they don't like it for different reasons, and you mentioned some, you know, like the patriarchy and things like that. But do you understand like the basic idea, like saying, okay, Jesus, right, center person of Christianity, Christ.
I mean,
you
I'm
know?
not a believer in the like. Do I believe in the message and that the Bible is like a kind of great book and has a lot of like important messages.
More so
but
so I think like the Bible teaches Jesus died on a cross and rose again and things like that. Whether you believe that happened or not, do you understand like why? What's the story? What's the meta story of the Bible? I call it the meta narrative.
Yeah.
And the Bible is many different books.
Well, right, and I'm not going to be reading it, so I'm not going to profess that even in my religious education. I don't feel like I have. I mean, I had exposure, but I would say that is not like anything I retained or appealed to me in any particular way. At the end of the day, do I kind of understand the message,
the big picture of
the message that that the belief system that Jesus is symbolic of kind of a universal love or infinite love that's available to us, and that our obligation, right, is to each other, safe and cared for, loved. I would say, I immediately, my mind, like there's value in the Ten Commandments, right? And kind of the messages through that. But, do I believe that, Jesus as a prophet? I don't know. Do I believe that the Bible is like a great work of like mythology? Probably, like at a minimum. Not saying that it's not possible, but I would say that's kind of where my belief system is. That it's not unlike Greek mythology or any of the stories that we have to help us make sense of the world around us.
So like there could be people of this great love from other religions who demonstrate that love, and it's basically just follow the way of love, right?
Well, right. It's all depending on if you're a Jew or a Buddhist, or right. We all have these very similar kind of iconic figure, right?
Do you think it would be possible so I believe in God, right? A God who created the world, a God who's very loving and kind. Do you think it's possible for me as a Christian to believe God also hates at times?
Yeah, that's where I have the challenge, right? That I don't believe in a hating God. I don't believe in a vengeful God or an angry God. Do I believe in the concept of hell? Like, I actually, even though I believe there's good and evil that exist in the world, I do believe there's like kind of, light forces and dark forces. Do I believe in like fires of hell and all those things? Like, I tend to not.
Yeah. So if you think about, okay, God is always loving, right? But we're not. So the problem is, okay, so let's say someone is molesting a child. Does God love that? Or does he hate that?
Right.
And I would say God hates that. In other words, God hates sin. He hates lies. For example, when we lie to one another, he hates the broken relationships that result, the lack of trust that's there when people lie to each other. He would hate lying, And
we have a visitor.
Hello. And so it's not actually ungodly to hate bad things. As a matter of fact, it's actually godly to hate bad things, if that makes sense.
I think that makes sense. If I was gonna equivocate God with something, I would just say that if we're talking about, spiritual forces or like God is light. I believe in that kind of symbology that if we're gonna say that there's a God is light, and that things that happen that are not part of that godliness or that light or that are evil,
it's like a shadow,
are just not part of God. God can't hate that. It's just not.
It's the lack of God.
That's right. There's
the lack
God.
of light.
It's godlessness and darkness, and that is not. God doesn't have the ability to hate that, because that's a completely separate thing. It can only be the light and the highest being and our highest consciousness and our ability to deliver the best in ourselves. That doesn't have anything to do with these having an opinion about it, because that's I like to think, right, the concept of God is not opinionated. God is an idea, right? And I use the word God a lot because I don't have the language, right?
Mm-hmm.
You grow up in your faith, so you, as somebody who's grown up in a faith, you use that word.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe in the power of what you and I can connect with in the word God, and that is not an opinion or a force that can wreak havoc or condemn people to eternal damnation. That's a force of light and goodness, right? Mm-hmm. And that there's forces of dark and evil too, and those exist in a separate way that have their own energy and their own force, and so that's sometimes where religion is like, because that's so prolific in the Catholic Church to say, well, this type of evil is associated with the devil and hell, and there's some sort of tipping point, right, where you're just gonna fall down the shaft down to hell if you don't watch it.
Yeah.
And I don't believe.
And it seems kind of arbitrary, right?
Yeah. You know what? Listen, we all know and have relationships with people who are not their best selves in this lifetime and have lots of darkness, and we all encounter people who want to metaphorically or in actuality suck people's light away, and or just and you feel that, and when whether you know it at the moment or you know that in hindsight, you see that in people. And I hate to think that even if I determine, right, that that's not a person I want in my life, that they're going to hell.
Right. I can say that. I mean, I'm not Lutheran anymore. I go to a non-denominational church. I became a Christian when I was in my late teens, and have made a habit of reading the Bible. Like it's a part of, it's like a daily habit. So I'm pretty familiar with the Bible, and it's not our place ever in the Bible to say that person's going to hell or that one is.
Well, it's not our place, but I don't think that there's a God who makes that decision either, right?
Right. So all I can say is the Bible does present, like things about God that I didn't make up, right? So it's more, so in terms of like, where do we get knowledge from? Like you're saying, you've kind of like come up with your beliefs from kind of what makes sense or what you like, or
right here I've cherry-picked the best
sure
stuff, right?
So the other way of coming up with truth or faith, religious faith, would be that it's revealed to us through a source like the Bible. So if I take it, and I take it that the Bible, and the more I read it, the more I'm convinced of this, just because of the way it so works together. Everything, all these different authors and books of the Bible work together to form this story all the way through of God creating people, giving us a choice, free will, but we choose against God. We're cut off from a relationship with God because we're going our own way, and we're not treating God as God anymore. And the whole Adam and Eve thing, He gives us this sense of right and wrong, so all people around the world have this shared morality. I mean, we disagree about the details, but there's still a sense that we have to somehow find excuses for certain behaviors, you know. And so we know we have a conscience, a moral conscience, and yet we break it, and we go against it at times, and somehow, so all religions are basically trying to reconcile us to our Creator, having gone against what we know to be right?
Right.
And so God comes along, and actually doesn't just come along, he predicts that he's going to fix this situation through a chosen people. So you've got the whole Old Testament and the people of Israel, and then Jesus, you know, God enters the world in the form of a person and says there will be a punishment for sin, that it doesn't just go unpunished. So like getting back to that whole idea of like a child molester, like there is a consequence for that. It's not like God would just be light and not respond or not have an opinion. He has a very strong opinion, the perfect moral opinion about that. It's wrong, it's bad, it shouldn't happen, there must be a punishment, there must be a consequence. And so this whole idea that there is a hell, a heaven and a hell, is the idea that there has to be a consequence for evil. It doesn't just go unpunished. And too oftentimes in this world, we know people just get away with murder, literally, you know.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily happen in this world. But for God to say, you know what, I'm going to enter the world in the form of a man and take that punishment for humans on their behalf, to me that becomes the greatest love story in the world of God showing that kind of love, right?
And having mercy on people.
Yeah. So like when I hear the phrase God is love, I'm not just thinking God is friendly and kind to, you know, and it's a love that has a price to it. In other words, love means sacrifice. God was willing to sacrifice something for us. He doesn't just love us for no, you know. It's like, you know, the song Amazing Grace.
Yeah. It's a beautiful song.
Yeah. What makes grace so amazing is that we don't just, you know, like grace means an undeserved gift. You know, like
Right.
I didn't deserve. Well, we say grace, right? It's like I received this food. What did I do to deserve it? You know, God gave me everything that I have.
Right.
And I've gone against God, and so I don't deserve anything. And yet God has graced me with food, and the amazing grace is He has graced all of us with His Son dying on the cross. You know, and so maybe there's different ideas of what it means to say God is love. You know, that this love actually has a context, like a historical context, and a price that was paid, you know, rather than just always being positive about something, you know.
No, and I do think that relationship is more complicated than just saying, hey, God is light and you know, and everyone is deserving, right? I mean, there's kind of these, like, I like the idea of, I don't want to say I like the idea, so maybe the wrong wording, but I like the story of Jesus and the crucifix, and about like how he was like stripped down, right? And there's like a humiliation involved in this, and like in our lives, like we, you know, as people, we have these moments of like humiliation and where you're you know, you're kind of put in the spotlight, right? And it feels so uncomfortable, but then the beauty in the story is, right, that there's still this like undying love that results from this whole event, right? And that as people, we, even in our worst moments, are still like deserving of love. Doesn't mean necessarily that there's not work to to be done, right? Or, I would say it's look at the power of God in changing people, right? And how particularly, let's use like 12-step programs. There's a very strong connection and affiliation in the 12-step process, right? For God to be present. And a lot of people who maybe not had relationships with God previously or eschewed relationships with God. And, I kind of like scratch my head about that, because I think if you're really an atheist, right, it's hard to get on board with like a 12-step program.
I would think so, yeah.
Right? Like, and you may need it, but there's kind of this, it's really hard to reconcile if you just really never did like, it's one thing to maybe not have the relationship with God, and so you come back to God through being in a 12-step program. But I think if you're somebody who doesn't believe in God, right, and this whole framework of how to reconcile like a huge challenge and work back to being a better person with stronger relationships where, addiction isn't marring or getting in the way of your true self, is really, really difficult. And so, for that reason, I've seen, I think there's some struggle there. But then I also feel that there's a beauty, right, in the fact that, and I hate to call it a crutch, like, I think, I just have contemplated, right? Well, is the 12-step program working because people are really reconnecting to faith and idea of God and a higher power? Or is it, their sobriety or their success is dependent on them adopting those beliefs, right? And having like, so I question sometimes like the intent, but at the end of the day, right, if that is what works, and I have friends who are going through those programs, then more power to you. And
they have to come to a point where they're willing to submit to a higher power of some sort.
That's what I'm saying.
To show some humility.
Right, and maybe that's part of our psychological makeup as humans, right? That makes it an easier pill to swallow, or there's something in us that wants to have that belief or depend on have a dependence on knowing God. And again, I don't see that in a negative way. Like, I think that's a very beautiful thing, and we each have our right to have a relationship with God, or the idea of God, or maybe it's not God, you call it something else, but like to have our own spiritual relationship, and however you kind of come to that is like a positive thing.
See, I think Christianity or the Bible would say different. It would say, do we come to God on our terms or on God's terms? See what I'm saying? Right. And so I would have to say, yeah, anytime I've tried to come to God on my terms, it didn't work out well, in my experience. And it gets pretty ugly, because it's like I'm saying, okay, I will have a relationship with you, God, if you do this, or if, well, who is God here, and who is the creation? Who's the creator and who's the creation? I think, and I just want to say this real quick. One of the hardest things that people have a hard time understanding about God in the Bible is that God is actually a jealous God. That and it says repeatedly, God, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, right? And it's like, well, how could God be jealous? And the only way that God could be jealous and still be good and still be God is if he truly is God and knows that he made us, he knows what's best for us, he knows how this world can operate, he's the one that holds it all together, and if we follow him, things will go well, right? If God was just like a weak man who is worried that he doesn't get the kind of attention he deserves, that would be pathetic. But if God is truly God and truly deserves our devotion and our obedience and our the glory that only a God that made the whole universe deserves, then the jealousy is just a desire for things to be the way they should be. Does that make sense?
I understand that. So, what does God say about what does God say about people like me or the atheists or the people who haven't come to accepting, right? That there's some sort of jealousy or some sort of need that, that we each have some sort of individual obligation to have a relationship with God.
So what would God say to that?
Yeah. Like, if God is kind of jealous, right, or wants has a desire for us to come to Him, right? Mm-hmm. So what does God say about people who are not believing?
I would say, I'm not God, obviously, but I have read the Bible.
In your belief, and your understanding, I know you're not God.
I don't want to. I always have to be careful about saying what would God say. But I believe that that you and anyone, all people, like I was saying, we all have a sense of right and wrong. We all know the good we ought to do, and we don't do it all too often, and the bad things that we shouldn't do, and all too often we do it. So it's a God-given moral conscience that we've broken, and so and we all have a sense of that there is a creator. Just by looking around, we know there's a creator because there's a creation. Kind of the same way you look at a brick wall, you know that there were bricklayers there. Like, we all have this sense of God's existence. We kind of, have to work hard to deny it rather than just accept it. So I would say,
So what do I do? That's what I'm saying. How do I reconcile that?
Yeah.
If I'm not, I'm unwilling to change. I'm unwilling to come to having a relationship with God. Then how does that?
What would hold you back? What would keep you from a relationship with God? Like, what would keep you from saying, you know what, Jesus really, He died for me. Like, this is what happened for me. That people helped me to realize through exposure to the Bible, and that Jesus had died on the cross, that He had died in my place, that I was a sinner, that I realized God doesn't owe me anything other than maybe punishment, that I haven't been following God, and I don't deserve any favor from God, and yet He gave His Son, He died for me. And so when I finally realized, what would be the right reaction, I actually didn't just say, okay, I'm going to start believing, because I already believed that Jesus died for me. So I'm not quite sure where that came from, right?
Right. Because that's kind of the hallmark of a Christian.
Yeah, belief is, by the time I put it into words on my mouth, I had already believed in my heart, if that makes sense. So it's like, how did I start to believe? It's not a choice I made. I guess it was exposure to these Christian truths that I eventually ended up believing. But I came to a point where it was like, Jesus, if you died for me, if you gave your life for me, what can I do but give my life for you? How should I respond to that? I think I need to start obeying you. I need to start finding out what that means. I better start reading the Bible, and that's where I started reading the Bible. And so God wasn't through with me yet at that point, and He's still not through with me today. And I still have a lot to learn. And I would say God has been working in your life He's exposed you to, I didn't have to tell you that Jesus went on the cross. Or, I mean, you've heard all of this before.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I heard all of this as a Lutheran, but somehow it just didn't click, and it's almost like God sent me even more to, other people to tell me. But
do you find, I'm sorry to interrupt, do you find God in having these conversations?
Yes, I actually do. I leave, like, if you were an atheist, for example, and it just seemed like there's no hope for you at all, right? I would leave the conversation with two things. I would think, wow, if God hadn't worked in my life, I would be like that. Like, I would just feel like I would have no hope. It's a reminder of the gift of faith that God has given me. So it's encouraging that way, just to say, if God didn't work in my life, I would be the same way, without faith, The other thing is, I've actually, I guess I'm very encouraged that people like yourself and other people are very willing to talk about these things. And I just feel like God is already working in your life and in their life, and I feel like He's not through with them yet, and I'm grateful for that, and I pray for them. I'll be praying for you,
Thank you.
I feel like it's worth it. I feel like the conversation's worth it,
But I would...
Even some people respond with, probably at worst annoyance at me. I still feel like it's important to put those questions out there. What do you think happens after we die? It's something to consider.
No, and that's important. I think there's value in having the conversation, but I would just caution that, some of the things you said imply, right, that somebody who's an atheist, right, and that there's some sort of lack of fulfillment in their lives by not believing. And although I don't think that it's a lack of fulfillment or that there's that they're missing out on anything. I think if that belief system sits well for you, again, I might personally, right, if it was my significant other, right, might have a hard time reconciling something like that because I believe so strongly in a spiritual life. But I definitely don't see that as lacking. I think that one of the off-putting things about Christianity is to suggest that by not having a relationship with God, that your life is somehow less fulfilling. And so that's just one aspect of, again, like, I see the beauty in your faith and I see your commitment, and I'm happy to have met you and have that conversation. But I just caution that, for folks that don't have that belief system, like, their lives aren't less fulfilling. And or who are we to say that by not having a belief in a higher power, that there's something defective in their worldview. And so there's a little bit of that. I know I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but there was a little bit of that, or at least if I was a non-believer. I think by
its very nature, it's unavoidable. And as a matter of fact, if, for example, and I've told this to atheists, and I think they have been able, like, if sometimes I'll tell them, okay, I realize you don't believe in God. I realize, okay, it's all given, right? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is no God. Maybe the Bible's totally a hoax. Maybe it's not true, right? But if I truly believe it's true, and if I truly believe that without Christ we are lost, we are cut off from a right relationship with God for eternity, whatever that looks like, if I truly believe that, and if I truly believe it's almost like if I believe you have cancer, because all of us would be diagnosed with the same thing, and there's a cure, and I've taken the cure and been cured myself, doesn't mean I'm a perfect person, but it means, that's how I see Christ. He's the cure to this cancer of sin in my life, right?
Right.
And
I know it's hard to divorce that, right, because we all have our belief systems, right?
Yeah.
And things that we hold on to very, very deeply, whether it's religion or political views or, just fundamental, worldviews about how people operate and how consciousness operates and things like that. And so I'm not immune to that either.
Yeah.
And I just think that right, to be willing to have those conversations and express those views to each other is important.
Yeah.
And so you've given me the opportunity to do that today, and so I appreciate that.
So I guess what I was going to say though is, if I do believe these things, even if they're not true, if I don't express them, that's almost even worse.
Well, right. You have to be true. You have to be true to the person and the beliefs that you have. I mean, it's just
which actually kind of, in a way, implicates a whole lot of Christians who have these beliefs but never share them.
Yeah.
So, but bottom line, I just believe I'm a teacher. A lot of times people don't even understand like the Christian gospel or what the Bible says about things, and they're basing their beliefs on false presuppositions. Well, I think the Bible says this, or I think it's that, and most people have these opinions about the Bible, haven't read it for themselves or heard snippets of it when they were little.
Right. And it's like a game of telephone in some ways, right? You hear about the word of the Lord through a mouthpiece, right? And in a church, right? Or
as Protestants, we would read it for ourselves.
Right. But a lot of times,
direct,
right? You're getting that interpretation, like kind of fed to you, and so. Right? People of faith, no matter how faithful, don't always have a knowledge of the Bible. And I would be the first to admit, like, I wasn't raised with like a deep understanding of the Bible. I know how to find like the page in the mass pamphlet, right, that says what the spiritual gospel readings are, and things like that. We don't have Bibles sitting in the pews at church. I mean, that's not how, church. That's not how my experience in church, was. And so I'm not going to profess I don't know all the ins and outs of the Bible, but it's certainly a part of you, and to do so, and an important, like, I would never say, hey, did you stop going around and talking about the Bible or your understanding.
I mean, bottom line, everyone makes their own choices, and I feel like having the conversation helps me understand others better and helps them understand me as a Christian better, and hopefully the Christian message, hopefully the Bible a little bit more, but so.
That was awesome.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's on anymore. I guess it is. I was thinking the battery is
It's
probably
like
going to die.
It's a like long conversation.
Sometimes they go long. I asked for 5 or 10 minutes, but I enjoyed talking. I mean,